Thank you and welcome to today's session. We're experiencing some challenges, but thanks for allowing us the time to speak to you about digital identity and what we've been busy with as BankservAfrica and as the wider community, looking at digital identity. And what we're doing today is we've got a couple of panel members that are joining us, and it's going to be a panel discussion which will be interactive, so please join in, ask any questions as we go along. But we'd like to tell you a little bit about what we've been busy with as a community, and we're really proud of what the community's achieved to date. Just to give you a little bit of background, we kicked off approximately a year ago now, where we started engaging with the digital identity community and starting to chat around what digital identity is and what it needs to solve for and what it needs to look like. What we realized when we were approached by the South African Financial Blockchain Consortium to play this coordination and facilitation role is that there needed to be some alignment, because people were in different spaces in terms of their digital identity journeys and what they saw digital identity as. And we took it on ourselves. We're very privileged as BankservAfricans to be involved in this journey. And we were brought in and we started playing this coordination role and starting to unpack it with the community. This started about a year ago, like I said, and in March of this year, we started having more focused group discussions and actually doing interviews and surveys with the participating community. And we made it a very collaborative type of way of approaching it, where we invited everyone. It was an open door policy. We have a community that's very large and then continues to grow. And it consists of fintechs, government bodies, regulators, and then people in the payments and financial services area. And we started unpacking and putting this digital identity story together, which we released on the 1st of September. And this is a story that wasn't built by BankservAfrica. This was a story that came out of these discussions that happened within the community and focused on inclusivity, trying to look at solving for fraud and all of these different benefits that we would have. So I'm joined today by my panel. We firstly have Chantal Maritz from PwC. Morning, Chantal, and she is a partner in strategy. She's been in the delivering projects of this like for 20 years now. She specializes in financial services and leading some of these payment transformation practices that we have going on within the industry. We also have Annah Masoga. She's the head of policy and regulation division at the SARB. Welcome, Annah, and thanks for agreeing to participate this morning. Anna is responsible for developing policies as well as a regulatory framework within the South African payments industry. And then last but not least, of course, Brits, which I think just about everyone in the industry will know and have spent time with. Mark, thank you very much. Mark is the Senior General Manager of the Prudential Division at the Banking Association of South Africa. He is also the Executive Director of the Center of Excellence in the financial services space. And there they look after a think tank which focus on producing research within the financial sector. So welcome to my panel members. This is a little bit of what we've done to date. And I'd like to reach out to Chantal now, just to share a little bit with us, Chantal. And I guess the question to you is, what is that digital identity about? Can you give us some of the basics and, where do we sit in the game at the moment?
Excellent. Morning, everybody. Actually, Max, if I look at some of the comments already on the chat and some of the people who joined us in the audience, it's actually some of our community members who helped us define this narrative. So we should ask them to test them to see if they're paying attention. But I'm very happy to start the conversation, because it's always important to take that step back and say, what are the basics that we're looking at? So what is digital identity? So when we started looking at it and bringing this community together, we started with the World Bank definition of what digital identity is. So to take it from there, it's a set of electronically captured and stored attributes and these credentials that can uniquely identify a person. I like stealing Mark's description, because Mark always says, think about it as the commissioner of oaths. So a commissioner of oaths goes and verifies that this is your identity document. But it's now in the virtual world. So it's in this digital world. So over time, you build up this digital credentials that are authenticated from your perspective. Now, it sounds efficient, it sounds convenient for us, but over and above the efficiency and convenience, it's actually about enabling access to services. It's enabling financial inclusion, opening of bank accounts, healthcare, education. I know this conference is focused around payments, so we'll focus the conversation today also around payments. But I think it's just important when you step back and you think of countries, the basics of how they digitize and how they move into the new world. They usually have something called a digital stack, where they look at instant payments, they look at identity, and then they look at the regulatory landscape and how you can enable that. So it's important to recognize, as South Africa, we're also on that journey. We know about rapid payments program that BankServ and the industry are driving, and BASA, about taking this forward. We also know about the establishment of the payments industry body. But I think digital identity is one of the fundamental cornerstones that is going to take us as South Africans forward.
Well, thank you, Chantal, and thanks for those insights. And yes, you know, I think you mentioned that we have a lot of the community participants that have joined us today. So please jump in where you feel you can also add any value and share some of your insights as to the journey to date. But Annah, if I can look to yourself, just to talk to us a little bit around, you know, the SARB and from a regulation perspective, how this might have an impact from legislation to regulation on digital identity, and how this is going to touch the digital identity world, and how you see this panning out in terms of making sure that digital identity is something that moves forward, and how perhaps we look at doing that. Thanks, Annah.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. So I think from the SARB side, we have like started engaging on exactly what is it that will enable the promotion or promote actually the adoption and use of digital payments in South Africa. And that we're not only doing it ourselves, we're doing it in collaboration with other stakeholders. I think it is quite key, because it is not something that as the SARB we can take on. We definitely need collaboration with other regulators. But from a regulatory perspective, there are certain considerations that we have, or certain use cases that we have currently identified when it comes to digital identity, and we see some of these use cases bringing some benefits to the NPS that will actually assist in ensuring that we enhance access to digital payments. So if, for instance, you are aware that we have released a Vision 2025, which is, of course, promoting the use of electronic payments. So from our perspective, we have been developing a digital strategy to say, how then do we enhance the use or the adoption of electronic payments, and digital identity is one of the enablers that we've identified in the strategy. So we will soon be consulting on that, but I just wanted to mention that because from our perspective, what we see from a benefits or policy objectives is that we are often told that regulation is slow, that things are not moving as quickly as needed, that payments sometimes can be costly, especially when you have to do onboarding and KYC. And as regulators, we are also looking at ways to minimize the cost and make sure that we address the frictions and there's necessary efficiency and safety in the payment space. So we're looking at all of those benefits that can be provided by the digital identity, and it's something that, as I say, we are still considering, we are still exploring as to what exactly are these benefits and what do they mean for the payment side, whether it's from enhancing the efficiency, but also looking at what safety issues we need to consider when we're talking of digital identity. We are told, obviously, we see that in a digital era, we have to then consider issues of cyber threats, cyber risks. We are mindful of money laundering and financing of terrorism issues also there. And those are some of the considerations that we're taking into account as we consider what is the necessary action that the regulators should take with regards to digital identity. So basically, it's mainly, is there a problem that we need to solve? And even if there's no problem that we need to solve, are there policy objectives that we feel that will be advanced by digital identity? And as I said, we are able to identify a number of those objectives from integrity, efficiency, and safety of the NPS. With regards to digital identity. And I think we are also asked, but yes, you have identified those benefits, but do you actually think that is necessary to regulate digital ID? Is this something that maybe the industry can develop solutions, implement? And then we always say, but we need to strike a balance to say, perhaps we can let the industry innovate, and if we feel that maybe the adoption and the use of digital identity will bring benefits to the NPS, and it's something that we would like from a regulatory perspective to accelerate, then we might consider a more formal regulatory framework. But that also comes with the next question, which is then who will be best placed to regulate? Is it the SARB? Is it the FIC? Is it the information regulator? So those are the issues that will have to be considered if we then decide that perhaps there is a need for regulatory framework for this. And I think what is important is that for us to be able to regulate around digital identity is for us to be able to identify those use cases and be clear as to what can digital ID be used for, what can it be used for in the payment space and other sectors in the financial sector. And then it will also determine the framework and the scope of the framework to say then, do we need a single law for this, or do we need a more consideration at what are the existing laws and whether or not those laws cater sufficiently for the regulation of digital identity, or they need to be updated. And I think, it talks also to the scope. What should be the scope of that regulatory framework? What should be the key players? Who should provide this ID? And what should it be based on? What credential will you be looking at? And who will be the users of this? And then it enables the development of a framework. And another question is whether it should be mandated. Should we say everyone from a regulatory perspective should be given access, or should receive or accept digital identity in verifying or authenticating identity? And it's quite important that we consider all of these in regulation. So let me pause there, Max, and hand over to you. Thanks.
Anna, thank you very much, and I thank you for your insights. I think you've touched on an extremely important point, and that governance stream and having a look at legislation and regulation that's going to affect and allow for digital identity to work effectively is extremely important, and we certainly see it that way, and the community has, through the journey, basically identified that as one of the main streams that we're going to have to, focus on in terms of our next phase of the journey. So thank you for that, Anna. So I actually, while I have, this in mind, Chantal, would you mind just sharing a little bit around, what the community saw? Because there are different models that, that are out there that are being used elsewhere in the world. Can you share a little bit just around, the community thinking and some of the discussions that took place?
Yes, I'd love to. And I think it's important because as soon as, and all the people on the call, I think there's 137, if I'm reading the stats here correctly, are saying, so if the regulators already got their eye on it, then what are we doing as South Africans? So it's important maybe to step back and to say, okay, where are we in this game and how are we comparable to the rest of the world? Now, if you think of South Africa since 1950, when we first started with the identification system, the Department of Home Affairs has actually done a lot of things just to, if you think about your smart cards that you've got, your smart IDs, and we do recognize, and the community recognizes, that the Department of Home Affairs is the sole authority responsible for providing identity to South African citizens. So they're the custodians, they own it. But it's actually about doing the network of networks. How do you connect these parts to enable this digital ecosystem and to enable the economic growth that we see in the other countries? So if you look globally, countries like Estonia, that is really, really advanced. If you think of India and what they achieved with their Aadhaar identity system, and that the government saved, I think it was close to 5 billion on, or, just on savings in 1 year, it just shows the benefits that can be brought to South Africa. Now let's get to some of the details. What are the different identity systems and which one can we copy and paste into South Africa? Well, the answer is we can't. We can't just copy and paste. You need a system that drives the national imperatives. You need a system that builds trust. So yes, there's centralized systems like in India, you get federated, distributed models, and then you get the SSI, the self-sovereign identity, where as the owner of identity, as Chantal Maritz, I can then be empowered to say, where can my identity be used? So for South Africa, we are different. We have to face it. We're unique, we're resilient, we're a fantastic nation. We're all biased, but we love it, and that's why we have national pride. But we need a unique model. So the community came together and said, listen, our design needs to be correct. We need to have the proper governance in place. We need to make sure that this system is about inclusion, it's about trust, and we can actually solve the important problems from a country perspective. And that's why we've decided as a community that the hybrid model is something that would be fit for purpose. But it doesn't mean it's done, signed, sealed, and delivered. And I know, Max, you're going to unpack the details. But I think it's important to remember, in order to deliver something that's unique for South Africa, you need to take into consideration the various stakeholders, from the banking community to the retail community to all the different digital community, to identify the story, because we can learn from other countries. It can become the catalyst for change, and we know our country needs economic growth. So we have to join the narrative together to make this real. But the community has been phenomenal in supporting the narrative.
No, thanks, Chantal. And that leads us on to Mr. Brits. Mark, if you look at Chantal talking about the community and the impact that this could have on society and what we need to get this over the line, could you share some of your insights and what you think is going to take for us to actually realize this digital identity dream or story that we see it as at the moment?
So thanks, Max, and morning, everybody. I mean, digital identity, you have to realize, is something new. It's not the evolution of something that's existed for many, many years. It is actually new. It's where the consumer is actually taking ownership of their identity, and it's consumer-centric identity. And that is creating a great opportunity for us to do something new. So the technology that underpins the digital identity, it all works. There's a lot of conversation around technology. That's not the issue. International experience has demonstrated that there are many use cases. So digital identity has become an international or global imperative. And the question for us is, how do we get it right for South Africa? I mean, how do we collaborate in this very small country with limited resources to make sure that we get the biggest bang for buck in terms of implementing a digital identity that works and satisfies the needs of the people? BankServ has shown that the community has to be drawn together in order for us to get ideas that flow and to bring everybody into the network. And the whole concept of bringing regulators and policymakers with fintechs and other interested parties shoulder to shoulder has demonstrated a great deal of success. And you can see from the BankServ report that we've been able to move from the theory of 5 years ago to the practical insights that we have today. You know, the challenge I think we're going to face is adoption. If we just have a look at the way COVID-19 has been sort of embedded as a crisis in South Africa, and people aren't even, you know, they're not even getting vaccinated. There's a challenge with adoption, and we have got to make it in such a way that there is a very clear, practical, and beneficial reason for us to use digital identity in South Africa as part of our daily lives. And with that, it's key for us to be able to make sure that we create an army of ambassadors for change for the digital identity movement. Each individual on this call has to start becoming a vocal and a force for change to make sure that in your own organization, you start thinking about digital identity as a solution to a potential problem in your organizations, and to be able to talk very convincingly at your own dining room tables around why digital identity matters and how this can really make a big change to the South Africa that we want to live in. I mean, this is a payments conference. So stepping aside from payments, I mean, just think of the amount of fraud and identity theft that takes place in this country. Things that happen without you being present. I mean, imagine being in a situation where your identity number, your bank account number, all these valuable things that everyone cherishes has no value if I'm not present. If it's not me that's actually doing the transaction, it would make no difference whether you have my identity number or not, because you simply cannot do anything about it. And digital identity could change that, could make it an actual fact or reality, that it makes no difference whether you know who I am. It's only me that can actually contract and do what is necessary. And just to go away a little bit from payments again, I mean, you know, trying to find your medical history is quite challenging when you have multiple doctors and you've traveled around. Same with your academic qualifications. You know, losing things is a very real problem. And when you talk to people at the Department of Home Affairs and you talk about somebody who's only got a birth certificate and they're 20 years old, you know, that birth certificate's been around the block a few times. And then you want somebody to take a photocopy of that and certify it and hold it so that you can demonstrate that you've done the right thing. Digital identity brings us into a whole new world of convenience for the consumer. And these specialized documents can all be recorded and kept, you know, to make sure that we have the longevity that you're looking for. A simple thing in my mind, and I'll close with this next, we can carry on talking, but a simple thing in my mind is when you get something delivered to your house and that person arrives and gives you your new cell phone or your new bank card, surely a digital identity would be the most solid way of recognizing that the person has actually received it. No nonsense about, you know, getting somebody's driver's license. You use a digital identity to prove that you are the person that is actually receiving that product. So it goes a long way, and there are many, many use cases, Max, many use cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and appreciate you sharing your insight. I actually see that we have a couple of people that I think are keen to ask a question. So perhaps before I get into taking you through some of the next steps that we as the community want to take for phase 2, I'll offer some time. I see we have Raymond Berger. Raymond, do you have a question you'd like to ask us?
I think I was just trying to get into the chat. Maybe I clicked on the wrong button.
Okay,
but Joe, maybe now that you put me on the spot, let me have a go at it. When we talk about digital identity, I think everybody can agree that the merits of what it represents is definitely there, right? And it's a solution for the future. I do see that there are obviously a lot of different providers in the market who've got technology in this space. And how do we balance the regulatory, the PASA kind of approach with the multitude of players out there? Is it industry standards that I think someone mentioned something about that a little bit earlier on, or does one player just get picked to take the lead? Someone like PASA, BankServ, someone like this, or is it a regulatory driven thing that everybody just needs to comply with? And what happens when you get access to it? How does let's say, for instance, I don't know, Pick n Pay verify someone, and how do other people get access to use what Pick n Pay's verified, for instance, as an example?
No, good question, Raymond. So part of the next steps, I'll touch on that briefly, but there'll be a governance stream that'll be running along with 2 other streams. But to answer your question around the rules of the game and who participates and building the trust and governance frameworks within this ecosystem for digital identity is part of exactly what we need to do. And in my mind and the community's mind, that decision hasn't been made yet as to who it is that does it. Is still being decided on, and is part of the conversations that need to be unpacked as part of this next phase. So the report talks about the high level, this is digital identity in South Africa, but now it's how we do it. And those are the next discussions and the next phase that we need to go into. I don't know if any of my panel members would like to expand on that. Chantal?
There's no hand, so I'll put my hand in this way. So I think the most important thing to remember in this space is that it's not green fields that you can dream it up and say, let's start from scratch and everyone, let's do something. I think the point is you need to recognize that there's been progress. Like you say, there are service providers at the moment that can maybe offer portions of the solution. But digital identity is really complex because it's now operating in this whole digital world. And the uniqueness of South Africa is actually, we keep calling it the power of network of networks. It's about joining the best of the different service providers, whether it's a BankServ, whether it's a fintech that's working, whether it's the Reserve Bank, or whether it's BASA. But it's bringing these communities together and saying, first of all, what problem are we solving for? Because the tech, and people might shoot me, the tech is the easy part. Any tech can do fantastic things, and there's advances. The complexity comes in orchestrating the communities to work together. And I think that is going to be the most important challenge that needs to be tackled. And to Mark's point about bringing people together and recognizing if you've got a great tech solution, awesome, join the party, but let's all be in this party and understand what we need to do to connect the dots. And I think if we keep that as our true north, it'll just help everyone solve the problem and not get hijacked by technology. Because technology can be sexy, but it might not solve the problem.
Thanks, Chantal.
Fantastic.
Raymond, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you
very much. And sorry for putting you on the spot.
No worries.
Yes. All right, so I saw quite an interesting question. I know there's still some guys sitting within the moderation panel, but there was an interesting question just around, and this was from Celia in the chat, around how do the poorer people get access to digital identity, and are we not perhaps excluding them? We talk about inclusivity, and that's one of the objectives of digital identity, but they could move further away from this. I don't know if any of the panel members want to talk to this. I can, Mark.
So I think Max, this is an important element of South Africa, and the objective behind digital identity is not to solve for financial inclusion. It's to provide a new tool which, when applied to financial inclusion, will solve for problems. So in the chat, you know, they're talking about we're unable, banks, for example, are unable to open a bank account without 2 forms of identity, etc., etc. Well, digital identity is going to be able to provide us with alternatives and options which might enable us to do more in terms of the regulations. And we've got Annah on the call here around particularly the payments environment. But, you know, the actual transaction, which is the phone-enabled transaction, doesn't cost you anything to do. That's the principle, right? So you're not going to pay to be digitally identified. And what ends up happening is the poor will be able to get quite a benefit from this program, simply because once they have their identity registered, and remember, we don't solve for the Department of Home Affairs. We don't give national identities. Once you have qualified for a national identity or for a passport, whatever that category is, you can then bring it into the framework, which then gives you that trust model where you can actually use it without cost to actually to engage in particular economic activity. I mean, so it's not about solving for the myriad of problems that we have in South Africa. It's about creating a new tool that, if in the hands of the right people, will be able to change society, and government is part of that journey.
Thank you, Mark. And I think you touched on another question that's, Annah, I see you had your hand up. Would you like to come in there?
Yes,
Cool.
Mac. I really I agree with Mark. I think we also see digital ID as an enabler for financial inclusion. So it's not a silver bullet that will come and revolutionize the inclusion landscape. But I think that, we see it as having the potential to unlock some of the access issues, and especially those that had linked to them were the issue of costs, because we are told that it is quite costly to try and even open a payment account, if I may put it, because there's a whole lot of documents that are being required from us. And the providers are also saying, from our perspective, it's also costly to do KYC or customer due diligence. So we see it as once payments become more digital and consumers become more trusting that I've got an identity that is safely stored and that can be used and accepted, then perhaps it will enhance the adoption of payment, of electronic payments, let me just be clear, of electronic payments, and then also even its use, because then that safety element will be present with regards to those transactions. Thanks.
Thanks, Annah. And Mark touched on government being part of this journey, and I saw one of the comments in the chat as well. Johan, nice to see you again, and although digitally, but just around the Department of Home Affairs has to be part of this journey, and we need them to buy in politically and to actually join this journey. So we certainly see it. The community has seen the same thing, Johan, and we are busy with or in efforts to collaborate with Department of Home Affairs, and we're using all the networks available to Department of Home Affairs, and we've been part of some similar discussions. So Department of Home Affairs is looking at digital identity as well as digitization of certain of their information. So we are in conversations with them. But thank you, Johan. At this point, I'd like to bring in Mind. I see that there are some people sitting in the queue, so we'll try to field as many questions as we can, but also allow just for a little bit of time to share the next steps and how to get hold of us, because although we want to monopolize your time, we know that we only have limited time with you today. So I'm going to bring in, okay, I see Mind has left the conversation. Quibus, I see that you may have a question.
Yes. Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can,
Oh,
Quibus.
morning. Perfect. So I have two questions. So the first question is, what's the difference between private and government identification platforms? First, private platforms can most likely scale quicker, and I see potential for both living with each other. So a government identity platform and a private one. Private one probably managed by the banks, for example. And then the second question is, can the rails of real-time instant payments be used for digital identification? Those are my two questions.
Thanks, Quibus. So the first question, Mark, would you be happy to speak to that? And the second question, in terms of the payments rails, I think Chantal, if you're comfortable to carry the one.
So Quibus, thanks. I mean, I would think that there has to be an ecosystem. There has to be a trust model. And depending on who the participants are and what you're trying to achieve, so you should be able to have both in the same ecosystem. You know, we're not starting from scratch when it comes to a country. Some countries have used the bank ID, the bank system, just to create an identity for their country. Other countries are actually starting from scratch with just being able to issue identities. We're not there. So where we are at the moment with the Department of Home Affairs and having conversations with government is to recognize that they have a role to play. If we are able to allow the private sector to go ahead and build and implement and do the use cases, we would probably see government joining us in that program and then implementing the regulations that are needed to make sure that there are no bad actors, to make sure that there are standards that are adhered to, so that there is some teeth behind the program that we are going to trust, which is a digital identity. There's one key element that's always important to remember, is that when things go wrong, you go to government to sort it out. You go to the government court system and you ask a judge to opine on the discussions that you've had. And for that, you must have an identity that is recognized and supported by government. Very, very important.
Thanks, Mark.
Excellent. So I'll tackle the next one because I'm watching the time and I know Max is going to say, Chantal, you're speaking too much. But I think the important thing to recognize when you look at instant payments and digital identity is they're solving two different problems. So saying that you've got an instant payment rail doesn't mean that you're solving the problem for digital identity. However, they both are from building that platform to actually solve the bigger problem. The two of them hand in hand can address fundamental challenges we face in the country. So they have to work together. But by just having RPP, and I can say that because I'm involved on both, but by having RPP, it's phenomenal, it's fantastic, there's fundamental elements you can address, but you need the digital identity elements and components sorted. So you actually have to almost bolt it on, the two of them work together. For example, if I'm going to use SASA payments as an example to get grant payments out, yes, the payment method of RPP and using instant payments is fantastic. But the first fundamental problem you need to solve is the identity. So although they are different, they would need to work together in order to solve it. I hope that makes sense, Quibus.
Thanks, Chantal.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Quibus. Appreciate you taking the time to ask the question. So before I take any more questions, I'd just like to cover the next steps around where to from here in terms of the community and what we're planning to do going forward. We're kicking off very shortly around the second phase to this journey. Within that phase is going to be 3 streams. The first stream is going to be a business stream in which we're going to unpack the commercial model for digital identity, because as far as possible, this thing needs to wash its own face. It needs to be able to work for all participants and to also, most importantly, not add additional cost to the end user or the legal entity and consumer on the street. So that's the first stream. The second stream, which I touched on, is this governance stream, which we want to unpack legislation, regulation, and how that affects digital identity, and also either assists it, or is there something we need to look at in order to remove barriers that might prohibit realizing the digital identity benefit or benefits. It'll also focus on building the trust and governance frameworks. So the rules of the game, you know, who participates, how do they participate, what do they need as a minimum, how are they exited if they're not trustworthy players. So, you know, how do we keep this environment an ecosystem which allows for only those that are participating in the right way to participate. And the third stream is a technology stream, in which we're going to be creating a sandbox to allow for community members that would like to test use cases and perhaps what they've built within the digital identity space, to start testing things like interoperability, to make sure that they speak to one another, to have a look at different attributes or technology skills that they may have, and start playing in the space to allow for them to test these things. So if anyone is interested, please reach out to us. We have supplied you with an email address and contact information. I know that we also haven't gone into half of the questions that have been asked today. So please send us any questions you may have that we haven't responded to, and we'll be more than happy to respond to those. I think we have time for one last question, and then I'll hand over back to Ursula, and she can continue with the rest of the day. So I could see Philippa is waiting in the queue. Philippa, would you please share your question with us? Okay. Seems that we've lost Philippa. I see we have Dawn. Okay.
That's the luck of the draw. As soon as you mention their names, then people disappear.
Right. I see that Philippa says that we have covered her question. So, Fadia, I'm not sure if you're still waiting in the queue. Good morning, Fadia.
Good morning. Apologies. No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadia. All right, and then Jonathan is the last person we have in the queue. Good morning, Jonathan. Okay. Oh, there we go.
Hi, guys. Hi. My question is as follows: is a central depository having all of this information would most definitely streamline and also affect financial expenses on that. Why do we struggle to get buy-in? Is it financial institutions? Is it corporates that are looking for their own way to sort of do that? I personally feel that having a central depository would make perfect sense for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I'll give my 10 cents and then I'll hand over to Chantal perhaps. But I think there is a move and a shift in thinking around a central repository that's kept by each institution that has its own customers, and seeing the value in it perhaps not being a centralized solution close to that particular organization, and starting to share this information or share parts of the information that maybe that's been looked at. But Chantal, maybe you just want to touch quickly on the way the community saw it, and it's not a case of a centralized place for storage.
Yes, I think the one thing to keep in note is the community came back and said, listen, first of all, we do want to use the power of the networks. I'm getting back to the network of networks and say, where there are benefits and pooling resources. So efficiency and effectiveness is one thing. So where there is no differentiator that you can use a centralized source for certain elements, yes, that's fantastic. And that's why I do think you've become the servant leader as BankservAfrica, because they've said, listen, we can't do it in maybe one institution's backyard. We need to find something that nationally will service the community. So that is one component to consider. But the other component to consider is that there still needs to be ownership to the end user. So as much as you want to centralize certain services, you do want to look at the hybrid model for South Africa and say what logically makes sense. So the final architecture still needs to be determined, the design, and as we go into this business case, it needs to be finalized. But the important thing is about the community being able to access the services, and that's where that national drive has been successful in other countries. So we have to leverage that for South Africa as well.
Chantal, thank you very much. And Jonathan, thanks for your question. I hope that we covered it. If not, please, again, reach out to us. At this point, I just want to say thank you so much to the panel members. Really appreciate your time and taking part in the conversation and sharing your insights. I'd also like to thank BASA for inviting us and allowing us the ability to share where we are in digital identity and this journey. And we're super excited around the journey going forward and some of the benefits that we could realize as South Africans. So thank you, everyone. I'll hand back to Ursula, and enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week.